Hey, everybody. I hope you guys are having a really great day. I hope that you are enjoying altitude thus far. My name is Lexi, and today we're going to be talking about diversity in business, opportunities, and challenges. I currently work at BetterCloud. I am a senior quality engineering manager and have been here for about 4 or 5 months now. And I'm super excited to be moderating this panel. Mosey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Mostly Platt. I'm a senior security partner at Netflix for governance, risk, compliance, and assurance. I was a security compliance director at BetterCloud for 2.5 years before joining Netflix.
Nice. Nice to have you back.
Appreciate it.
Miranda. Yeah.
Yeah, I am Lorinda Brandon. I'm a VP of Engineering here at BetterCloud. I've been at BetterCloud for about 6 months now. And prior to this, I was with Twilio and Capital One. And I'm happy to be here and be talking about this important topic.
I'm excited. And Carlos.
Hi, I'm Carlos Batista. I'm the CISO at Backed. And prior to that, I was honored to be the CISO of a really cool company called BetterCloud. I'm happy to be here as well. Thanks for having us, Lexi.
Also nice to have you back. I'm excited. I'm excited. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. One of the first things I want to talk to you all about is recruiting and hiring, right? So we know that job descriptions, interviews, and tech tests can and have been a barrier to entry for a lot of underrepresented groups. I'm curious, as hiring managers, how do you make sure your job descriptions are inclusive? What are some examples of what you're doing as hiring managers to make sure you are creating an inclusive pipeline? For example, we just recently removed the requirement to be college educated to get into working at BetterCloud. So I'm curious about you all's thoughts.
We all did that pretty recently in an effort to bring in people with alternate backgrounds, right? We know not everybody has the access to that kind of education. We know that lots of people are learning how to code and how to test from different kinds of backgrounds, and we want them in. I think the other thing we have been working on too is the wording of the job postings. So making them less of a checklist, like here's all the required things that you have to know and have to have done in your past before you can apply, because we know studies have shown that like there are a lot of barriers to entry for underrepresented populations that look at that list and say, I don't meet 100% of this list, and therefore I'm not going to apply to this. So we want our job postings to be as welcoming as the company is when you get here. So
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, Lorinda. I mean, from a security perspective, we know and have known for a long time that some of the best talent has never stepped foot in a college classroom. And so it's fantastic to hear what BetterCloud is doing. I think the other thing that sort of jumps out at me is we try to be very, very precise and intentional about the language that we have in our job descriptions. So trying to avoid gendered language, for lack of a better word to describe it. So trying to stay away from words like, hey, we're looking for a rock star, or worse, a stud, or even the other way around. I mean, there's trying to avoid language that says, hey, we're looking for someone to nurture and cultivate. Those words can also have, very certain connotations as well. And so we try to be very, very clear about what we're looking for. And Lorinda, I love the point that you made about sort of getting away from the bulleted text. One of the things that we are trying to be better at is just being more authentic about what we're looking for, not being so kind of precise in like the old technical word of like, you must have 5 years of blah, 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 and 10 years of blah, 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 blah. Being able to say, hey, we just want someone who's excited about building, secure solutions and modern architectures. Can you do that? If so, we want you. And that's kind of the approach that we're trying to take. But I think what BetterCloud is doing is fantastic.
Yeah, so before I left BetterCloud, I either wrote or reviewed like 3 job descriptions. And we were on the security team, we made the decision to remove the college requirement because none of the team members thought it was relevant to the work. So that's, shout out to Austin Whipple, the security architect. He was the loudest voice on that. as well as Matt Svensson, security operations. So that was one thing. The other thing, though, kind of along Carlos's point regarding the bulleted checklist, is to just make sure like the job description is authentic and not creating barriers for things that are nice to have versus need to have. So it becomes more intimidating to the people that are reading the job description, right? Like things we know are nice to have, we can just save that for when we're doing our interviews, right? It doesn't have to be in the job description, right? So that was something we were trying to be conscious of and just focus on attributes of a person that we would like to work with, like that we know we need to have that kind of those attributes on the team for the team to function, but then be open to opportunities where we may not have a lot of experience visibility so that we can get candidates that we would never expected, but been pleasantly surprised by.
Yeah, I think that's like what you just said, Mosey, about you want to cover some of this stuff in the interviews, right? So you want to get more people in the door so you can have the conversations, because the conversations are where you're really going to learn the most. And I think that's the challenge with job posting, is that you're trying to encourage people to apply, but very often you're doing the opposite and you're sort of closing a door on somebody that could be really great. So getting them in, getting more people in so you can have more conversations gives you a much better selection of people.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one thing that I personally am trying to work on is when I get a pipeline of resumes, sort of picking a few out that may not necessarily tick all the boxes and maybe have that first conversation, because you just never know what they might bring to the table that you never contemplated or considered when you wrote up or dreamed up this job description. And I've learned some things, and I've been fortunate. Like I've had people go through the process and we brought them on where on paper they would have necessarily met like all of those boxes because they bring something to the table that isn't easily expressed in years of experience or particular technology skill set, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think too, sorry, Lexi, we're just going to keep talking.
Yeah, go for it.
You'll get to ask us one question. But I think the other thing that you can't overlook is once you get them in the door, that experience of the interview is crucial, right? Who do you have on your panel? Are you representing diversity around your company with your panel? And hey, it should be a big red flag for you if you can't put together a diverse panel of interviewers, right? I worked at a company years ago where that was becoming quite an issue because we had so few female leaders and we were trying to bring in more female leaders. And they looked around just walking in the office. And then who actually sat down and interviewed them, they were like, yeah, no, I don't think your hearts are in this. And, you know, it's really important that once you bring those people in the door, that they have that welcoming experience, that they see themselves, and not just see themselves, but see that there is a variety of people in your environment. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure we made that point, because it's not all about the job postings. It's also really critical that you set up the right interview experience.
Yeah, absolutely. That was going to be my follow-up question. Is that would you say that's a turnoff for you all if you are interviewing at a place? Although I know you're all very happy in your jobs right now, but when you are interviewing, is that a red flag for you if you don't see a diverse group of folks interviewing you?
Yes. And I shouted out too.
When I first joined BetterCloud, before Chocolate Rain became an official ERG, it was just a Slack channel. And we would have lunch, monthly lunches. And people talked about how it was a turnoff for them before they even applied. Like they had to get convinced by a recruiter or someone that they knew at the company to even apply, because when they went to the BetterCloud website 3 years ago, they didn't see anybody that looked like them on the website. And so then, talent acquisition started to make changes to the website to reflect, the actual diversity of the company. So I think even sometimes it happens even before people select themselves out before it even gets to the interview. But then for the interview itself, like the last hire I made at BetterCloud was for a security compliance manager. And I walked into the interview wearing like a Motown t-shirt and her eyes just lit up. Oh, my kind of person. He's like, he came to the interview with a Motown t-shirt. I didn't wear the t-shirt on purpose. It was just at the top of the drawer that day. So, but she appreciated seeing something from her culture that she could identify with. And we had a great conversation. She ended up getting hired, not because she liked my t-shirt, but so yeah, I think it does matter.
Oh, sure, Mosey.
What conversations do you all have with your recruiters to make sure you're getting a diverse group of folks, right? Because recruiters are the first stop to who gets to talk to you all. What kind of conversations do you all have with your recruiter to make sure they're being intentional about that? Or do you?
No, that's a great question. I think from my perspective, it's one of those things that you try to call out, and you obviously have to be very thoughtful about how you approach that. But it's certainly not a bad thing to reach out and say, hey, look, listen, I want to build a team of different perspectives, different experiences, and that may mean trying to call a very different pipeline of candidates. And I think when you describe it that way, it makes a lot of sense to at least some of the recruiters that I've worked with. I don't know that that's necessarily a silver bullet. I think another thing that I know that personally helps me is when I'm hiring for roles, I've been fortunate enough to build a fairly diverse network of professionals that I can reach into and say, hey, you interested in this role? Or, hey, if you know someone who's interested in this role, and often I tend to get a lot of diverse candidates from all sorts of backgrounds. And so I personally try to draw from my own network as much and perhaps more than I try to necessarily rely on recruiters or talent acquisition to try to solve that for me, even though I think it's a great point in that there's probably more that we can do. And I'd love to hear Mosey's and Lorinda's perspective on how they approach that situation as well.
Yeah, so at BetterCloud, the recruiting team actually did a great job of challenging me on that. Like when I put together the panel, they came back to me and said, hey, can we get some women on this panel? Oh. Because I actually told them I actually wanted to hire a woman for the role because I thought we needed that on the team because we were all men, and it was starting to get to the point where I could predict what people were going to say before they even said it when we were discussing the topic. And he's like, if this is what you're looking for, we need to have someone on the panel. I was like, oh, yeah, fair point. So having the recruiters challenge me on that was very helpful. But then, like Carlos said, I don't think the work. And Lorinda made the point first. The work doesn't stop at the job description. That's just the first part. Or like opening up the job rec is just the first step. Like recruiting, whether it's actively recruiting people, and even as part of that, letting people know, don't be intimidated by the job description or by XYZ that you may see when you look at the company's website. Like, there's a place for you. There's a place for you, and you can make it. And you can make that place as comfortable as it needs to be. Right, the company will help you do that. So I think trying to get that message out there, because there are people who will see, oh, I read the job description, but I only check off 8 of 10 bullets, right? And so I'm not going to apply. Or I read the job description, but I don't see someone that looks exactly like me or has my background, right? Or the company is, most of the people are headquartered here, and I'm from this part of the country. It's all of that. Like those are questions that need to be asked. But ask the question, don't just make an assumption and select yourself out. And I think it's up to the hiring managers to make sure that people don't do that and make people feel safe to ask those questions.
For sure. Yeah, and I think some of the other things that I have conversations with the recruiters about, in not just in BetterCloud, but previous companies as well, is cultivating relationships with broader networks, right? Networks that are devoted to diversity, or boot camps, like we were just talking about boot camps. There's lots of people, those boot camps want to talk to everybody. And so establishing relationships with some of them so that when they've got a new cohort coming out. And if you have room in your organization for junior level people just coming out of boot camp, that's a great way to really build that diversity and also build your levels of talent in your organization. And so I very often will shoot out, to the recruiting team, here's some organizations that I love working with, right? Here are some people that I know are devoted to this kind of, changing the ratios in tech. And so I'll do that. But I also, again, circling back around to the experience of the interview, very often the first person anybody talks to is the recruiter. And so it's really important that that recruiter give that welcoming and also viewpoint of the diversity of the organization that they're about to enter into. And I think, Mosey, you were touching on this a little bit from the hiring manager perspective, and it's up to the recruiter also to be, hey, you're right. There's a lot of men on the website, or there's, a lot of this demographic on the website, but we want to change that, and you're part of that, right? So that the recruiter can really carry a lot of that message.
That's a really great point, and kind of dives me into our next question. So we get folks in the door, you talk about getting more junior level folks in, and that can leave a really great opportunity for sponsorship and mentorship. So we all know that that can be an incredibly powerful tool for helping grow and develop underrepresented groups. If you all had to think back to when you first started working in tech, and you think about things that can be resources or access to people that you didn't have that now would be super helpful, how does that shape what you give your teams now and how you think about mentorship and sponsorship?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. So I think for me as a Latino, like the thing that I really wish I had when I was earlier in my career was another Latino mentor, like someone fairly senior who could sort of show me the ropes and help me sort of navigate this, this corporate environment that, yeah, at least at the time wasn't as diverse as it is even now, and we still have work to do. I really wish I had that. And so I think that way that's shaped me is that now that, maybe I guess I'm sort of in that role now, I have an opportunity to, and maybe even a responsibility to give back a little bit to others who are junior in their careers. And so I look forward to, and I really relish and enjoy those opportunities where someone comes to me, they may be junior in their career, they may be Latino or Latina, and are asking for input or advice about how to navigate or how to get into cyber, or how to, maybe grow within the industry. And so I look for those opportunities to try to give back. But to answer your question, for me, I really wish I had that when I was a kid. And so that's sort of my perspective.
I have a funny story about, it's not actually funny, but we can laugh in retrospect. I worked for a while at a hardware company that was converting to be more of a software company. So I was like, not only, some sort of weird beast in that I came from software, but also I was a female in a very, very male dominated environment. And so I literally had no leaders that were female, either in my chain or anywhere around me. And I went to one of to my manager at the time, who was a VP at this company. So theoretically, you'd think you'd know better. But I went to him and I said, I really would like to get a mentor. And I said, how do I go about doing that? And he said, well, the way we do it is we approach somebody and say, I really like how you're working. What can you offer me? Can you be my mentor? Or do you know somebody who could be my mentor? He said, but I don't know how you do it. And I was like, well, meaning me in software, like, because there's not a lot of software people here. And he's like, no, women. I don't know how the women do it because I don't know where you would go look. And so then that was that. And he just sort of left me hanging with, okay, I guess I'll wander aimlessly around the hallways and see what I can find. So I would say, like, I wish I had the support of somebody in my early stages of, managing people. I wish that I had the support of somebody who was willing to go the extra mile and help me navigate that. Because that's why you're asking for help, is because you don't know how to navigate it. And he just literally left me hanging. The other thing, though, that I learned, and I learned it at that company, and I know, Lexi, we've talked about this, is sponsorship. So understanding what a mentor gives you is somebody you can go bounce things off of, right? It's a very direct conversation. But understanding that having sponsors, meaning somebody who will speak for you when you're not in the room, somebody who is leveraging your career, pushing your career when you're not even aware of it or near them or anything. It's when somebody says to you, oh, I heard great things about you from so and so. You know, I wish I had known earlier to click into that and say, that person is more important to me in some ways than my mentor. Like my mentor can help me think through a problem. My sponsor is actually elevating my career without me asking for it, you know. And so I think if I had learned that earlier, I could have avoided a lot of navigation pain in this industry.
I think for me, I think one, I was incredibly lucky to just stumble into mentors, whether I knew they were mentors or not, and you know, good bosses and leaders. I think I've only had really one bad boss in my entire, you know, InfoSec career. So one thing I wish I knew to appreciate how good I had it before I didn't have it. Because it all matters. Like all the things you take for granted, like all those interactions, all those, you know, influences, they all matter, right? In the larger scheme of things. But the one thing that I remember constantly talking about with my brother, probably halfway through my career, was we were just raised to get jobs. We weren't raised or taught to have a career. And so when we both hit our 30s, we were like, hey, you know, how's it going with you at work? Oh, it's going great, yada, yada, yada. And we both said, like, but what do we do next? Like, do we just keep this job forever? Or like, how do we develop? Like, what is professional development? And you know, how do we make a career out of this? And we were Chris Rock made this joke. He's like, when you have a job, time can't go by fast enough. When you have a career, there's not enough time in a day. And we were starting to feel like that. Like, there's not enough time in the day to do everything we want to do for our jobs. Like, does that mean we have careers? Because Chris Rock said that's what it means. But just trying to figure that out. And so if I could have some insight into like professional development earlier, right? Like, how do you manage your compensation? How do you manage role changes and things like that? How do you chart a career ladder, career path, things like that? That would have been great.
That is very insightful. You think you know a lot, and then you hear other people talk, and you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh, I didn't think about that. This is really helpful for me anyway. And so our last question, I want to talk about DE&I education and what that looks like. I think the tech space, and we have talked about this some today, it's growing in diversity, but obviously we still have a really long way to go. If you could give one short piece of advice or a resource to share with other leaders who are either struggling with educating themselves or struggling with creating an environment of inclusivity and belonging, what would your piece of advice be? That's a deep one, I know.
That is so deep. And we can only pick one.
I'll say go find somebody in your organization that doesn't look like you or hasn't gone through your experience, and spend some time with them, get to know them. You know, I don't know if you want to call it reverse mentoring, but you know, for a leader to sort of have that courage to be able to find somebody junior in the organization, it's like, hey, I want to learn from you a little bit, and just sort of not with any specific goal or purpose, but sort of understand. And so I think that's one sort of mini tidbit that I would sort of offer for a senior leader who is trying to learn more. There's a lot of great sources out there, but that's the one that sort of jumps out at me.
I love that.
I guess my one piece would be, don't constrain yourself to the big buckets of D&I, right? So we have big categories that we all tend to focus on, but the reality is that everybody's different. And, you know, I have a white male that I work with on a regular basis. We think very differently. It's not that we necessarily disagree, but we process information differently, which means we've had to learn each other in order to have productive conversations and ways of working together. And And that has to do with the diversity of just humanity, right? We're just different people.
That's an awesome point, Lorinda. And so now you kind of made me think of like another thing that's like in that neighborhood. And it's
you only get one, Carlos.
I want the second
only
one.
gave
Let
us
me have
one.
the second one, please.
You can have a second one. You can have a second.
It's super quick, and maybe you can like edit one of these. But like, essentially, ask yourself as a senior leader: are you surrounding yourself with just people who think like you? And that's another sort of like question that I think every senior leader should be asking themselves. Like, are you just surrounded with folks who just sort of say yes, or are you having folks? Are you surrounding yourselves with people who are challenging you? I think that's really important for any senior leader to consider.
Yeah. And before you go, Mosey, I have to respond to that. So like, I feel like we're in some sort of legal construct now. I want to rebut that. No, I'm not rebutting. I agree with you completely. But I think also expanding on that, like realizing that everybody processes differently. Everybody comes from a different place. Everybody is approaching their work a little bit differently, and the people around them a little bit differently. And as a leader, giving people space to be who they are. Not everybody is going to be able to deal with the process you put around them. Not everybody is going to have the same way of approaching the day. And so giving people that space around them to be who they are is important.
For sure.
All right, I'm done, Mosey, I promise.
All right, well, since we're doing two, I would have two recommendations also. One is there's a Wheel of Power and Privilege graphic by Sylvia Duckworth that I think really makes it crystal clear. It's very simple to understand, where people can identify where they have privilege. And in the center of the wheel is power. And the closer you are to power and the further you are away from that, shows you where your work is to be done, right? The power shows you these are the tools you have at your disposal, and the further you are from it shows you where you need to apply your tools to do work to help others. And so understanding that intersectionality, I think Kimberly Crenshaw has done great work around that. And so watching her TED Talks, reading her book is a great way to understand that issue, intersectionality, the different types of power and privilege we all have.
I love that.
This was such a lovely chat. I appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to have this conversation. I'm not really good at closing, so thanks.
Thank you, Lexi.
Thank you, Lexi.